Video 2. Benedict understands imagined communities. Benedict Anderson is an anthropologist, and in his very influential book, Imagined Communities, he tries to explain why nations and nationalism play such a big part in the way our societies are organized, how the world as a whole is organized in the 20th century. I'll present you with some of Anderson's arguments and definitions. And the argument is that nations are imagined communities. It does not mean that they are imaginary, as in they don't exist. They're not imaginary like dragons are imaginary, but that they exist in our discourse, in our thinking, in our conceptualization. They are a concept, like the German people, the French people, the English people is a concept. It's not it's something that we need to build up and imagine. It's not something that has some like an inherent reality like a rock. It's not imaginary like a unicorn, but it's not concrete like a stone. You may not agree, and you might feel that your own nation and other nations actually exist as objective reality. That's fine, but it's worth knowing his point of view because it is very influential on how academics think both about nations and about the lower power that they have through globalization. This video is about reading his writing, so I will proceed to move through the text with you and read it with you with some comments. It would be great if you download the file and print it or have it on your computer and take notes as I'm speaking. You'll have the text in the video as well. So we're reading from Imagined Communities, Reflections on the Origin and Spread of Nationalism, Benedict Anderson. So I did not bring you the very opening, but this is from the introduction and it gives us concepts and definitions. It's always useful to know how the writer understands the concepts that he or she presents to us. So before addressing the question raised above, it seems advisable to consider briefly the concept of nation and offer a workable definition. So this whole book is about nation. What does it mean? Theorists of nationalism have often been perplexed, confused, not to say irritated, by these three paradoxes, these contradictions. One, the objective modernity of nations to the historian's eye. The fact that if you're a historian, you notice that this idea of nation and specific nations is pretty new, versus their subjective antiquity in the eyes of nationalists. So people who believe in their nations feel like it belongs to the past, like it has a very long history, that it maybe has roots in biblical times or in the beginning of history or even prehistory. Two, the formal universality of nationality as a social cultural concept. In the modern world, everyone can, should, will have a nationality. Everybody comes from somewhere, belongs to some nation, as he or she has a gender, versus the irremediable particularity of its concrete manifestation, such as, by definition, Greek nationality is sui generis. Nations believe that they are unique, that their nation comes from its own sources, but somehow the whole world has nations. So there is something that is super widespread, but the people who experience it feel like it's unique. 3. The political power of nationalism versus their philosophical poverty and even incoherence. There's no great philosophy of nationalism. On the other hand, it is very, very, very much a powerful political idea. That's what Anderson expresses. This emptiness easily gives rise among cosmopolitan and polylingual intellectuals to a certain condensation, like people who've been around the world, who speak a lot of language, that feel less connected to their own nation maybe. They don't really understand what's so great about nations and nationalism. And even just the feeling that the nation is very important to you as some kind of problem rather than an aspect of our experience. Part of the difficulty is that one tends unconsciously to hypothesize the existence of nationalism with a big N, rather as one might age with a capital A, and then classify it as an ideology. So we think that there is some kind of something that we can name nationalism. And he says that would be a mistake. Then we don't understand it as an ideology with a name, because that's not what it really is. It would, I think, make things easier if one treated it as if it belongs with kinship and religion rather than liberalism and fascism. It's not really an ideology, it's more like an aspect of our world. It's not that nation is good or bad, it's just like having a family or having a religion. It's not like being Christian, it's not specific. In an anthropological spirit, then, I propose the following definition of the nation. It is an imagined political community, and imagined as both inherently limited and sovereign. He'll explain this definition. But whenever we have like a good definition, we should definitely highlight it. Now he's going to explain this definition. It is imagined because the members of even the smallest nation will never know most of their fellow members, meet them, or even hear of them. Yet in the minds of each lives the image of their communion, that they have something in common. Members of the nation will never meet each other, will not really know each other, will not really be a community, but they feel as if they have things in common. They feel as if they know each other to some extent, that they are all related in some way or other. The drawback to this formulation, however, is that Gellner is so anxious to show that nationalism pretends under false pretenses, that he assimilates invention to fabrication and falsity, rather than to imagining and creation. So Anderson says we shouldn't talk about it in terms of lies, but in terms of creativity and imagination. In this way, he implies that true communities exist, which can be advantageously juxtaposed to nations. But he's saying we don't really have real communities. All communities are imagined in some way or another. In fact, all communities larger than primordial villages of face-to-face contact, or perhaps even these, are imagined. So unless everybody know each other, the community is always going to be imagined to some extent. The nation is imagined as limited because even the largest of them, even the largest nations, encompassing perhaps 1 billion living human beings, has a finite, if elastic, boundaries, has finite, if elastic boundaries. So there's an end point to each and every nation, beyond which lies other nations. So you can't imagine the nation taking over the entire world. A nation has to have some limits in order to be thought of as a nation. We need to have us versus them. No nation imagines itself continuous with mankind. The most messianic nationalists do not dream of a day when all members of the human race will join their nation, in the way that it was possible in certain epochs for, say, Christians to dream of a holy Christian planet. You can't, even if somebody is really believes in French nationalism, he doesn't dream about making everybody French, because there has to be some kind of border to France in order for nationalism to make sense. It is imagined as sovereign, as having power, because the concept was born in an age in which enlightenment and revolution were destroying the legitimacy of a divinely ordained hierarchical dynastic realm. So it was destroying the idea of the king ordained by God. So the thing that got this power to rule over others, to control others, to turn the state into something legitimate, is the idea of the nation. Finally, it is imagined as a community. This is the key term for the book, because regardless of the actual inequality and exploitation that may prevail in each, the nation is always conceived as a deep horizontal comradeship. It's imagined as a place where all the citizens, all the members of the nation have a kind of equal share. Even if there's exploitation and part of the population is using another part of the population, and there's a very deep inequality, the idea is that we are one community and we all have an interest in the success of this community. Ultimately, it is this fraternity, this sense of Ultimately, it is this fraternity, this sense that we are all brothers, that makes it possible, over the past 2 centuries, for so many millions of people, not so much to kill as willingly to die for such limited imaginings. So the sense of community makes us willing to die for our nation. These deaths bring us abruptly face to face with the central problem posed by nationalism. The big question that I want to ask in this book: what makes the shrunken imaginings of recent history, scarcely more than 2 centuries, generate such colossal sacrifices? So he's saying, if nations are really so young and not deep philosophically, how come people are so willing to sacrifice their lives to protect the nation?